All right, this PowerPoint podcast is going to be about this topic from Chapter 6 that I call Stewards of the Land. A steward is a caretaker, and as humans, we are caretakers of the area around us and of our whole planet. And these are just a few ideas, you probably know a lot of them, that are from Chapter 6 about how we can better take care of natural resources and the ecosystems around us. Okay, one thing that can happen to land if it's not taken care of properly is this idea called desertification. This happens mainly in grasslands that border a desert. You learned about the Dust Bowl in social studies, and they were on the fringe of becoming a desert, an area that has no fertile soil. Here's your definition. In areas of dry climates, a process caused by a combination of poor farming practices, overgrazing, and drought that can turn productive land into desert. So these pictures here are showing you areas that were once productive. There could be crops, grasses growing in them, but because of these factors, it's now a desert, and it really can't support that plant life or the entire group of consumers that depend on that plant life. How does an area become a desert? One way is through overgrazing. Overgrazing of livestock and other animals that keep eating the same plants over and over and over again, those plants will eventually die. Their roots can no longer hold the soil down, and rain and wind can now wash and take that soil away. So that would is put it on its way to being a desert now because it can't grow any plant life. As animals keep walking over the same piece of ground over and over and over again, they can compact the soil to the point where water can't infiltrate it anymore. And that causes an area to become a desert because plants can no longer grow in that area. They can't retain that fertile soil anymore. Poor farming practices can also contribute to an area becoming a desert. And this is what you learned about back in the Dust Bowl in a social studies class. Plowing a field can leave that soil very vulnerable to loss by runoff from water and from wind. So when a field is plowed, it can't just be left there. Something has to be planted in it. And then something we cannot control is drought. So if there's an extended drought, that can cause an area to become a desert as well, in combination with these other two factors. The next thing would be, well, how can we prevent it? Don't let animals, especially in a grassland or a prairie or a savanna, don't let them stay in one place day after day after day. Move them from place to place so they could feed on new grasses, so that the land they were just walking on doesn't get too compacted. So continually moving livestock around, that can help to reestablish the plants that they were eating to prevent the area from becoming a desert. Farmers should not be plowing fields until they're going to plant on them. A field should not be plowed in the fall. A cover crop should be planted to help retain it. So fields should not be plowed until they're going to be planted. That way you don't leave your soil exposed to wind and rain. We talked about buffer strips as far as algae bloom goes. Those buffer strips can also act as wind stops. So an area of woods that you don't cut down, that you don't make into a field, that can act as a wind stop just to prevent wind from blowing away dry soil in times of drought. All right, so these are just some methods that we can use to keep fertile land from becoming a desert. And like I said, these are areas that typically border a desert, and are typically those savanna, grassland, prairie areas that are most likely to become deserts if they're not taken care of properly, mainly because they don't get the rainfall that other biomes do. All right, here's another topic. It's called integrated pest management. This is something else that we need to do to be good stewards of the earth. Prior to the 1980s, if you had a problem with rodents, insects, any other kind of animal pest in your home, on a farm, in your garden, in your lawn, just spraying and applying pesticides. That's what everybody did. Years later, once people are starting to see birth defects, nervous system problems, cancers, and they link those to these pesticides, people started realizing you can't just hose an area down with poison to get rid of mice or insects or termites or whatever it might be. So integrated pest management is a safer way to take care of pests instead of just using toxic chemicals that are also toxic to us. Here's how this works. This takes a little bit more effort and a little bit more time, but you won't be putting poisons around yourself and your pets and all over your property. They won't wash off into streams and all that. So the first step is to identify what the pest is. Okay, if you think you have a mouse problem, make sure it's mice. Make sure it's not chipmunks or something like that. If you think you have a termite problem, some testing to be done to make sure it's termites and not carpenter ants or just some other kind of insect. You do some research, then you learn about the exact pest that you have. And step 2 here, figure out why are they coming into your house. Okay, do you have a broken screen door? Is there a hole in your basement wall? Those things should be repaired. Keep the pests out. Okay, so find how they're getting in and exclude them. Don't let them come in anymore. If they're coming in for food, maybe they're getting into your pantry and getting into the dog food or something like that, then get rid of those food and water sources for them. Okay, put them into an airtight container or something like that. So step 2 here is, instead of applying a poison, stop them from coming in, or figure out why they're coming in and get rid of that, whatever's enticing them to come into your house. All right, step 3 is just monitor. Keep an eye on, what you tried. Did it work? If it didn't work, try something else. If you look down here at this picture of the ladybug, a ladybug's a natural predator of these insects called aphids. Aphids are pests that can grow on garden plants as well as in your flower beds. Introducing ladybugs, they'll eat those aphids, so you don't have to spray some kind of harmful chemical. If someone has a problem with mice, then get a cat. Okay, in addition to these other methods, let the cat be the predator and help take care of the mouse problem. So the main idea here is integrated pest management uses multiple tactics. Okay, pesticides may be used, but they're only used if nothing else has worked. All right, so remember, the whole purpose of integrated pest management is using multiple tactics to take care of household and garden pests without having to use pesticides all the time, because the pesticides are toxic and they'll affect creatures that you never meant to affect. Okay, as stewards of this planet Earth, we need resources. Okay, but you guys know there's two main types. There's renewable and non-renewable. The renewable resources are able to be replaced once they're used. They're able to be replaced as fast as they are used. Non-renewable either can't be replaced, or it takes so long to replace them, it's just not practical. Hopefully you know that renewable resources are things like solar, water energy, wind energy. Non-renewables typically tend to be things like oil and coal, things that take so long to form that we're using them faster than they can possibly form. Obviously, if you can, you want to be favoring renewable resources over the non-renewable. But even renewable resources do have some environmental consequences that we do need to be aware of. You've seen these windmills on mountain ranges in our area. Let's use these as an example of, they're good, it's a renewable resource, but they can affect an ecosystem. So they provide green energy, clean energy, wind is renewable, you're harnessing the wind to produce electricity, that's great. But there are some negative downsides to using this kind of energy. You may have heard of a few of these. On those mountain ranges in our area where you see these windmill farms, they had to cut down entire forests. They had to make roads to get up into those areas. So what was once in our area a deciduous forest is now gone. It's been clear cut. That's an environmental consequence. That's a negative impact that these kinds of things can have on their ecosystem. Birds and bats fly into these and it kills them. It's not because they're stupid, it's just that you've seen them, they don't look like they're moving that quickly. But you can talk to a math teacher about circular motion. Out here at the ends of these blades, they can be moving at about 100 miles an hour. And birds and bats can't detect that, and it's having an effect on the populations of some of those helpful organisms in that area. They're also kind of ugly. You wouldn't want one of these farms right behind your house, and they do emit a noise. So even though these might not seem like a big deal, and you might say, well, hey, those effects are better than mining coal or drilling for oil or drilling for natural gas, you're right, but you just need to be aware there are some negative effects of using these resources. Okay, we need to be practicing sustainable development. That means we need to be using resources at a rate that does not completely exhaust them. All right. So obviously favoring the renewable, using integrated pest management, um, not allowing areas to turn into deserts. That's all part of sustainable development, okay? Allowing our way of life to occur without destroying the ecosystem around us. An idea related to this is called biodiversity. Biodiversity would be an indication of how many different kinds of things you have in an area. So if you think about your lawn, if it's a perfect lawn, you don't have any biodiversity there. You have one kind of plant. But if you have some clover in it, some dandelion, some other types of grasses growing in there, you might call them weeds, but your lawn has a higher biodiversity. The tropical rainforest has a very high biodiversity. Lots of different kinds of things live in the tropical rainforest. Extinction brings down biodiversity. If creatures are going extinct, then they're not on the planet Earth anymore. So we've lost some diversity, so our biodiversity goes down. Biodiversity going down has an effect on the entire community. Think about this word we talked about, niche. If we lose creatures out of an ecosystem, that job they had may not be done as well anymore. That's going to affect everything in the ecosystem. For us as humans, those creatures that went extinct, they could have had medicinal value. We could have learned something through research about them to help us. So biodiversity is very important for an ecosystem. It helps to keep that ecosystem balanced, and each creature has its own niche. As we go down in biodiversity, niches go unfulfilled, and we're just losing that variety. And we might not see the consequence of it right away, but it will have an effect on that entire ecosystem and possibly on the entire biosphere. One more word is monoculture. You guys know mono means one. Monoculture is the planting, I should say planting right there, the planting of one type of crop on a piece of land year after year after year. We do this with corn sometimes. Corn goes in the same field every single year. That's a bad thing because corn is always going to take the same nutrients out of the soil. That's going to force the farmer to put fertilizer down. And you guys know overuse of fertilizer can cause algae blooms and other problems for the ecosystem. So monoculture kinds of farming techniques are not good. Okay, farmers should be rotating their crops, planting different things together to help avoid this monoculture and having to have such a reliance on fertilizers and things like that. Okay, so it's a balancing act. Okay, we as humans, we have needs, we need resources. But how can we meet those needs and maintain a certain way of life without destroying ecosystems? Well, it's right here, sustainable development. We should be choosing the renewable over the non-renewable whenever it's an option. We should be really careful about chemicals that we're using. You all know that they're going to wash off because you're in a watershed and go to the local body of water. So any kind of pesticides or weed killers or fertilizers or any kind of waste, even sewage, things like that, they are going to have an effect on the environment. We need to be careful about what we put onto the piece of land we're on or the nearby waterways. We have to work with our ecosystems instead of damaging them. Use buffer strips for wind protection and to absorb some of these fertilizers and things like that. We shouldn't be dragging nets through the ocean and just catching everything just to provide seafood for people. You guys told me through your carbon cycle essay we need to be careful with our emissions. We should be looking for renewable, clean energy sources. We need to manage our watersheds so that we protect our waterways. So it really is a balancing act, maintaining the way of life of people in a certain country, in a certain society, without completely using up all the resources and destroying the landscape around them. So this was all Chapter 6, Section 6-2 and 6-3. You guys already had all the vocabulary. This will be on the test that we're going to have coming up. Let me know if you have any questions, and review Chapter 6 just to make sure you understand these ideas.